Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the build to rent sector, which is one of the fastest growing and most interesting facets of the real estate and hospitality world at the moment. The session is one of a series of webinars in the run up to the Urban Living Festival, which is a new event that we are launching in July at Tobacco Dock in London. An Urban Living Festival is basically a look at how real estate and hospitality asset classes are converging, how the boundaries between them are blurring, and how cities are changing as a result. It's going to be a fantastic event. I think we're all really looking forward to seeing people face to face again as soon as we can, and we hope to see loads of you there. Today's session is kindly sponsored by Harmonics. More from them shortly. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you're not one of our main speakers, if you could please keep your camera off and your sound muted. We're going to have about a 45-minute panel discussion and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions for any of our panelists, then please do submit them in the chat function on Zoom. I've got some co-hosts working away diligently in the background to make things run smoothly. We've had more than 220 of you register for this session, which is fantastic. And you will all be receiving a recording of the session via email in the next couple of days. My name is George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief for International Hospitality Media. I've been a property journalist for around 20 years now. IHM is an online publisher for the hospitality sector and also an events organizer. So a little bit of context for this discussion, just some bullet points that I picked out while I was doing some research. The Office for National Statistics in the UK found that a third of 35 to 44-year-olds in England were renting from a private landlord in 2017. Compared with fewer than 1 in 10, 20 years before that. I think people tend to think of the rental market as being dominated by millennials, but actually the proportion of people in older demographics than that is higher than perhaps you might think. This quote really struck me from Richard Simpson of Watkins Jones, who said last week, if you didn't know there'd been a pandemic, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the build to rent sector is in the middle of a bull market. No, there aren't many sectors that can say that at the moment, so we'll touch on that again later. Knight Frank's report last year said that 2020 was a record year for the build to rent market in terms of investment, with over 4 billion invested, and that to date there's been a total of 41 billion committed to the sector. Having said that, our sector here is a drop in the ocean compared with the US, where the equivalent is referred to as multifamily. CBRE predicts US multifamily investment volume will reach 148 billion for 2021. The UK's build to rent stock includes over 50,000 completed homes and nearly 40,000 under construction, with over 170,000 in the pipeline. Despite the majority of schemes being based in city centres and primarily delivering apartments, build to rent can work wherever there is a strong rental market. And more recently, there has been a move towards some of the bigger players looking at suburban build to rent, which is a trend that we'll also touch on shortly. On the tech side, Moda Living, who are with us here today, has partnered with Samsung to roll out technology across its portfolio, installing up to 60,000 appliances. We'll touch on tech later. And build to rent companies have started appointing hospitality professionals to ensure a high level of service to residents. Moda Living has hired Richard Smith, who's with us today, formerly of De Vere and Marriott, while Southern Grove has recruited Tim Barrett, who's been at Marriott and Radisson to work at its new build to rent brand, Mast. And one final point, the ONS again, they said that if the declining home ownership trend continues in the UK for the current generation of 35 to 44-year-olds, older people in future will be much more likely to live in private rented accommodation than they are now. So as I mentioned, the webinar series is sponsored by Harmonics, and we're just going to show you a very quick video about them now so you can find out some more. And their contact details will be in the chat that you can see alongside your screen.
Harmonics is 100% dedicated to service departments and co-living, bringing together all the tools you need to drive performance and deliver a great guest experience. From channel management and direct bookings to finance, housekeeping, maintenance and customer journey automation, whether centrally or on the move, the platform consolidates all information into one system, saving you time, improving communication and maximising business performance.
Great stuff. Okay, so as you can see, we've got a really strong panel here. We've got lots to talk about, so I'd like to crack on and ask our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask you gentlemen from left to right as I can see you on my screen. So John, if you'd like to go first, please.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Badman. I'm an architect and director at CallisonRTKL. We're a global design practice specialising in master planning, branding, architecture, interior design, placemaking, etc. around build-to-rent developments. We've got a long history of multifamily design in the US and involved in around 10,000 units across the UK. Glad to be here. Thanks. Thanks, George.
Thanks, John. Richard, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard. I'm the Managing Director of Moda Life Management, which is the operational arm of Moda. So we're actually a fully integrated, vertically integrated company. So we design, develop, produce, and then operate all of our sites. We've currently got £2.5 billion worth of pipeline underway, producing next generation neighbourhoods in the build to rent segment. So really excited to be on this journey and looking forward to today. Thanks,
Richard. Ed, would you like to go next?
Hi there, yeah, afternoon everyone. Ed Ellerington, MD and founder of Package Living. We're a bespoke build-to-rent developer operator. We kind of sit across those two main facets of the build-to-rent sector, so both multifamily city centre apartments, where we have about 2,500 units coming through our pipeline at the moment, on site on a couple of those schemes across Milton Keynes, Newcastle, Cardiff and Manchester. We then have another suburban housing, which has just been kind of floated and mentioned as a new kind of entrant into the sector, where we've got about another 2,000 homes being delivered. And then we have a development management business, which works with a number of kind of public and private bodies, supporting build to rent and bringing forward build to rent on public land.
Thanks, Ed. Giles.
Thanks, George. I'm Giles from Harmonics. We provide software for running and promoting innovative living, such as build-to-rent, service departments, and co-living. I've worked actively in the sector for the last 10 years from a software and consulting perspective, and prior to that, for 10 years, actually developing and operating service departments and build-to-rent, although it wasn't as a well-known as a topic then for the prior to doing this. I'm very happy to be here and talk about the technology side and how that's being applied in the different ways of operating in build to rent. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Giles. And last but not least, Gerard.
Hello, everyone. Basically, I'm from a hotel background, hotel real estate. Been involved in about 500 transactions in central London, owned about 70 hotels. We like the synergy between hotels, services and residential. So two of our hotels, one is just outside London on the M25, looking to build 65 houses next to the hotel. And we have another hotel in the city centre of Northampton, and that we hope to build 130 apartments on, and we're interested in the sector. Fundamentally, we think hotels can service private rental sector very well, and I'm here to learn as much as common.
Thanks, Gerard. The LinkedIn profiles for all our speakers have been posted in the chat, so if you'd like to connect with them and carry on the conversation after this session, then please do. So I'd like to kick off by going back to that quote from Richard Simpson. you said if you didn't know there'd been a pandemic, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the build-to-rent sector is in the middle of a bull market. Ed, if I could start with you, does that tally with your experience of the last 10 months or so?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think it's absolutely correct that build to rent is kind of finally started to come of age, and I think that's probably as much of what's happened as it is that other sectors are struggling because of the pandemic we're in. The long adage of investors looking at sheds and beds, has finally been forced upon us, because actually retail assets are not an investment class that anyone's kind of really looking at, and offices are struggling for that very nature. So that by its very means we end up with build coming at the forefront of an investment market. But it's the perfect storm, combined with that sector really starting to now see completed stock coming through. It's starting to see, what really these buildings look like when they're complete, and the kind of the profile, the income profile that they can produce. I think would the build to rent sector have been as strong this year and going forward probably over the next couple of years without the pandemic? No. But would it have still been, would we have seen the increases we've seen over the last couple of years? I think we would. And that will continue.
Thanks, Ed. John, how about from your perspective? You've obviously got quite a broad overview of projects under development and in the pipeline. Would you agree with what Richard Simpson said?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, what we've seen, on the consultancy side, we obviously see things a little bit earlier, maybe, particularly from the architectural point of view. But the sites that are under construction have continued. Sites in planning have taken a bit longer to get through than they would normally have done, due to the local authorities working from home not being as quite effective as maybe the private sector are. But the lettings seem to have continued. I'm interested to hear from Richard of how he feels about that. The lettings seem to have continued. Inquiries for clients seems continues from residents looking to move into the properties. And, recent reports, even one this morning, I think from Savills, about, showing the residents are continuing to pay rent. So, I mean, that all maintains confidence in the market and confidence in the products, which I think is extremely important. But I think also there's we've all spent 9 months at home. And what we're talking about here is homes, and whether they're for rent or for sale, we've all spent a lot of time in an environment that we wouldn't have otherwise spent this much time using it for different uses. It's become our not just our home, but our workplace, our school, our place to shop. Our hairdressers, some of us need that more than many. But there's, the use of the home is changing, and residents are beginning to see that there is a different product out there. And that for me is the big shift in build to rent that's beginning to happen now, is that the bigger providers are now becoming known to the real general public, to see the option there is different ways to live than just in a mum and pop landlord scenario.
Let's talk briefly about which are the main and flourishing markets. Obviously, London is hugely important. Before the call, Richard, we touched on the fact that your company is responsible for 1/5 of the entire residential pipeline for central Birmingham. But which other cities are attractive, and which other cities are you active in at the moment?
Well, we have several sites under development at the moment. Liverpool actually opens this July, which is a significant block that we've developed on Princess Dock in Liverpool. Then we open in November Edinburgh, the McEwen, which is, I think, in Edinburgh, one of the very first truly build to rent developments, which is incredible for us. Then Birmingham opens the year after, phase 1, which would be the tourist accommodation block in Birmingham. And we have Leeds. We have from Edinburgh down to Brighton and Hove, to be honest. So we're covering the whole of the UK. And it's the excitement about it is the journey has started to begin. And picking up on what John was saying, the demand that we've had in Manchester, for instance, our site Angel Gardens, we've had to reforecast the uplift 4 times in the past year, because demand has outstripped our forecast model, which is tremendous for the investors, tremendous for the residents that we're creating this community for. We just really, at the moment, it's overwhelming the amount of opportunities there are out there. So it's very, very positive for us, that's for sure.
Ed, does that tally with your experience? And is this an across the board thing, or are there certain cities that are, you know, hotter than others?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, where you know, we go back kind of 10, 15 years, and my kind of previous role was at Grainger and running the acquisitions business there. And, you know, we talked to investors then. This was a London-centric idea. No one wanted to come outside of London. And then that slowly grew, you know, 2014, 15, to people starting to say they would go to Manchester, Birmingham, maybe Leeds, Bristol, and London. That was it. And now, you know, we've gone all the way through to, we're looking, you know, package living is focused on the 20 largest towns and cities for multifamily, and it's focused on every single suburban location. It's urban housing model. So, you know, that really has, you know, expanded hugely in that 10 years. And that growth will continue, because I think the suburban housing model is going to become, you know, a far greater and larger part of the build to rent sector than actually the multifamily sector is. And that, by its very nature, brings into locations that, you know, today you wouldn't necessarily look at to build a 20-story block of apartments, but you would look to build, you know, 50 houses. So it's, you know, the growth and the scale of this has got huge potential, and it's going to go much wider than the large cities that we currently look at today.
And George, one thing I'd just add that's worth just remembering in this residential sector, in the build to rent sector, is a bit like your hospitality world, is that every day the property isn't open, it's not making any income. So the timing of acquiring a site and then moving through planning, moving through construction to get to a point of opening, and then, you know, 18 months later, point of stabilization, is so significant to the model that you know, there are some cities where planning may be more, you know, Manchester's had a real boom. We opened an office up there off the back of it, and that was because it was a well-run authority that managed to get, we got scheme through planning in a quarter of the time that we would do in London. And, you know, that's a year of income. So that changes the land price, it changes everything about the deal when you're looking at timings, you know, and that's where offsite construction and those sort of things are beginning to be really a big part of our conversations. It's all to do with timing of getting the thing open.
Yeah, great. Gerard, obviously the traditional model for residential developers has been to build and then sell, but you were talking about building houses adjacent to your hotels and using the synergies between the two to run together. So when did you first get the idea for that, and you know, what do you think are the main synergies that you can exploit?
Well, we've had the idea quite a long time. It's interesting because planning is always an issue. We're actually finding on hotel applications that the planners are faster. They are more encouraging to allow businesses to thrive in their local communities. So they recognise that hotels are an anchor for offices, for residential, etc. So we just bought a building in the city 2 weeks ago, and that's not for private rented, but it'll be a hotel with offices, and the city's attitude was it should only be an office, but really bought into the fact we're going to do a hotel and a serviced office together. So I see the same synergy for residential. So our hotel in Thurrock, as an example, we hope to get 65 houses in the grounds. We see that with 65 houses that these will be, you know, affordable houses for the people that would rent them or buy them, and we see a double benefit. So they can come and use the facilities in the hotel, the spa, a gym, etc., because they're just extra customers for us. And if their kids or someone wants to work part-time on reception, that's also a benefit, but bringing it into part of the community. So in Northampton, we've got a swimming pool, we've got a gym, we've got meeting rooms. And I believe that post-lockdown, there's a lot of loneliness out there, and there's a lot of people who want a sense of community. And a hotel general manager, we're there 24/7, and the two can integrate really well. We can clean the flats, we can have the keys for the handover of the flats, we can pick up the Amazon package, we can service those flats really well, and equally the flats can come in, and the private rented sector doesn't have to build a swimming pool. I've got one already sitting there waiting for customers to use it.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard. Giles, from a tech provider's point of view, what's the main attraction of this market for you?
Well, it's been really interesting to see, because actually, as we sort of touched on, the BTR market's been coming through over the last 10 years, but it's that hospitality element that is really can be revolutionized by technology. You know, over the last, when you're just doing 6 months, 12-month rent and lets, then actually the technology is very simple for that. But with that hospitality and looking after the guest and their customer journey, then you can really deliver another level of service that hasn't really been seen in your mum and pop residential. So where we're seeing our technology is being well used is obviously we do the base platform for the renting and so on, but we've got customer portals or sort of guest or tenant portals where they can log in and interact with the business, and they can do that seamlessly on mobile phones. That saves them a lot of time. As we've sort of touched on, a lot of the residents tend to be young professionals, or although they're you know, that's changing as well. So they're very at home using mobile phones to collaborate and to interact with the business. The sales journey and the booking journey, where you're doing it under a brand, you can get all of your sort of brand messaging across onto the website around the community. Those communities cause buildings to you know, increase their occupancy and actually be more attractive and create wait lists. And so sort of the web technologies we put together will allow people to do virtual tours, to do the whole application process online, including sort of signing contracts. So that saves both the resident and the operator a huge amount of time and money. So it sort of save the administrative costs, but again, it makes it frictionless and then sort of go into the sort of the service delivery, where you can really look to deliver a great level of customer service. So if they have problems, they you know, maintenance issues are dealt with quickly. Some of the front of house pieces, as Gerard touched on, is you know, picking up parcels or just saying, look, things have been delivered, but also monetizing non-residential space. So these buildings have great common areas or gyms or you know, office space and so on, and technology, bringing that all into a technology platform gives a way to understand your customers' interactions and to manage that well, and also to revenue manage, which I think is something that is you know, a future trend to happen in the long stay residential world. And so yeah, I could go on. We support a lot of sort of functionality on increasing revenue, customer journey, delivering an excellent experience, and it's those hospitality drivers that really bring us into this.
Thanks,
George,
Giles.
may I speak? I think that Giles has just really ignited the key element of what Moda does. You know, that technology piece is an absolute critical piece of our whole journey. So we have a seamless technology. So our residents use an app for everything. That's engaging with local partners. It's getting into their apartment. It's paying their rent. Everything that we do is geared around IoT, information technology. So I think that the technology piece is perhaps one of the most critical bits that will separate us out from other market segments. And the BTR, I don't like calling it BTR because it's homes. These are homes. And I think John mentioned that earlier. BTR is a horrible saying. You know, I've come from a hospitality background. You would never say BTR in the world of a customer. So I think homes is the way we would like to look at it. We build 4 walls, but we're far more than 4 walls. It's the information, the technology, it's all the resident engagement programs. So through COVID, for instance, when we couldn't do things physically, we went virtual. Because we have this amazing app, we're able to do, an example is a gym workout on the terraces of the Manchester site. And we had 550% uplift from that program, which was run the year before that was virtual to physical. So it's a big increase of that technology piece, which is very, very exciting for us.
Thanks, Richard. Both you and Giles there brought in a thing about community, which we'll move on to later, but let's talk about investment briefly. Ed, you mentioned earlier that the sector has come of age now. So how has the investment community's attitude to, I'm still going to call it build to rent just for the purpose of this session, how has that evolved over the last few years, and how do you see it advancing?
Yeah, I mean, there's been huge changes from, this sector really started to come alive probably 2010, 2012. There was a lot of talk. We kind of had Montague Review and we had PRS Task Force. And at the time, very few people knew about it, and that sat across investors to councils. No one really understood what US style multifamily living was. And so what you had was a small number of parties, Granger being one, kind of M&G were another, starting to see they could get into the sector. But the reality was there wasn't the ability to get into it at scale. So you were reliant on a number of small developers who were often more landowners who'd basically taken control of land in the kind of post-GFC, trying to then find a way to deliver a different use class. And that's where forward funding really kind of came in, and it started with forward commitment, but it's moved to forward funding. And we then kind of, we fast forward, 5 years, and we've started to see that kind of generation of developers who actually can do this, time and time again, repeat work with institutions, and that's started to grow the scale. Where we're now starting to get to is stabilized complete stock and bring much drier capital. And that's when this thing starts to become really exciting, because the dry capital has always been there. It's been looking at the build to rent sector since 2012. It just can't get to the scale, and it can't necessarily take the planning and development risk. So it needed to wait for those completed buildings to arrive. They're arriving, and that means that suddenly that supersizes. And we're now going to find a real split, I think, in that investment market to those that can take planning and development risk doing so, because they can see, as with, say, the student market, where that end goal is, and those who don't really want to take planning and development risk, drier capital, just starting to buy up large scale portfolios, and we'll start to see that portfolio premium coming through. And that's, you can see that through Real Star Called Real deals, you can see that through Dandara and what they did with ECE. It's really starting to generate. And that's a really exciting piece, because when you start seeing portfolio sales, then we have a sector, and there's very many similarities between PBSA and where BTR is going, but BTR just has a much wider kind of appetite out there from the investment market, because it's such a large sector. It covers everybody, and it's not just that minute student market.
Yeah. So how do current and forecast yields and price per square foot compare for a branded build to rent project compared with not something from the non-branded polarized buy-to-let or PRS market?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at where kind of PRS, as we call it, standing stock, buy-to-let stock, probably was, historically that yield has come in probably by 100%. So you see that huge movement because effectively the change of what that sector looks like is ever increasing, and that's been quite a hard thing for the institutional market to get its head around, because it can see pretty attractive kind of gross net yields on existing stock if it can buy it, but effectively it doesn't take into account any of the life cycle costs of those buildings. So a lot of stuff is surplus stock. It isn't that yield is not real. So it's being forced to buy better quality, and as it buys better quality, that and there's more homes in the market, the yield has naturally come in, and we've seen that across the region significantly, and we've seen it generally in portfolio sales. So yeah, there's a huge now differential between standing existing build to let stock built in the late 90s, early 2000s to where build to rent fit for purpose multifamily living homes is going to be in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. We've had a question here from Macy Marvell. I don't know if anybody feels up to having a crack at this one, but he's asking how build to rent yields compare to hotels. Gerard, is that something you want to try and answer?
Well, I can tell you my view on hotel yields, and let someone else talk about home rental yields. At the moment, if you talk about the word distressed fund, there's billions and billions of pounds coming into. Hospitality's never had so much PR in its entire history, with everybody recognising in the UK around the world what an important industry it actually is. So every day I have a conversation with someone who's got 1 billion, 3 billion, 5 billion, all looking for hotel distress. And there's so much distressed income out there, there's going to be no distressed hotel sales because there's so much money looking for a home. So that's the first challenge. right now, so I spoke to a fund manager this morning who's got 1.5 billion, 3 times more than he had this time last year to invest. Hospitality is quite difficult for the investment committee to go through, so they're looking for discounts of up to 30%, and in reality know that they might get 10 or 15 if they're lucky. I don't think they'll get any, or very little. What's going to happen, I think, is that if the yield for, let's say, a Premier Inn or a Travelodge had gone from 5% to 4%, the markets now want to think that's gone from 4 to 5%. The weight of money and the cost of money is coming down, and I think those yields are going to shrink. So they'll go below 4%, but we're just waiting for business to come back, because there is no business and there's uncertainty if anyone will pay rent. So I think we're going to see a bit of a roller coaster where the buyer perceives the yields have gone up, the seller says, I'm not selling at the yield that it used to be worth, and if they get the right support from the banks, the market will come back. The fund manager this morning said the following: I've got 1.5 billion to spend this year. I can't recommend for my investors to put it into offices, because that's a bit uncertain. I definitely can't put it into retail. There's something in the All Stocks auction with a 43% yield on a shopping centre at the moment. So they can't go into that. They then have to come back to hospitality, or they go back to homes to rent. So I think I would guess that your yield profile is going to come down.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. Let's touch on changing attitudes to home ownership. The Englishman's home is his castle mentality is obviously changing. Richard, when do you think we might reach a tipping point here in the UK when renting will be the norm for many here, as it is in Europe and the US?
I think we're very close to that point now. I think we're talking just a number of years rather than decades away. Certainly with the demand that we've seen and with the pipeline in general in the sector, and I think there is a vast gap between what we need as homes and those can't be built. Whereas, we now live in a world where everything is on demand. You can even order a Costa Coffee cappuccino and it's delivered to your house on demand. So people who can rent a home on demand and literally within 48 hours move into a home and have their feet up watching Netflix with no deposit and no fees is a very nice, comforting thought for loads and loads of people, I think, in this industry that we're currently in, and in the wider audience of people around the UK. I think they're seeing that as an opportunity to not have a high deposit for a mortgage, not have the unfortunate stagnated salaries, which we now have. They're able to move to city centre locations, as an example, and live a very good lifestyle. So I think we're almost at that tipping point now. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there'll be significant growth that will be in all cities and all suburban areas as well.
I think the thing to think about, George, as well, is that the sector and the proposition from certainly our clients and the operators and people like Richard and Ed is to provide this lifestyle offering to residents. We're designing operating businesses that are linked. Their success is going to be about the customer service. And when you get into the detail of that, what it begins to do is to think, well, actually, you often rent, even before the sector kind of started as a whole buildings rental. You generally rent somewhere you can't afford to buy. So you can go and live in a city centre in either highly amenitized or not very amenities. There's going to be lots of different choices for people at different price points, depending on what they want to pay. But you're living in a cultural city centre. And you can live there for a year and a half and then think, well, I'm going to move. And I'm going to move, and actually my relationships changed, my job's changed. I'm now going to live in, go and move to Manchester or Edinburgh or Leicester or York or Bristol, wherever it is, and your job is taking you. But actually, I think the other thing that you can now do that. And a lot of people say to us who are heavily involved in the sector, well, you're never going to change the Englishman in his castle analogy. It's like, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to just offer people a choice. And that's the nub of it. What we're not trying to do is to change what the offer people have. We're trying to just broaden that offer. And the pandemic has changed that quite dramatically, because how people work is going to change significantly in the long term. So we talk about COVID being a catalyst and an accelerator of trends. Ed and I are working on a few projects where we're looking at retail, city centre, retail shopping centres, and involved in transforming those into mixed use destination lifestyle, including some build to rent, right? So, that's a good thing. People say that's terrible. Well, why would you not want a 50,000 square foot Debenhams store? It's like, well, we haven't got that anymore. What are we going to do with that space, and what would be the best thing for the city, for the residents, and for those investors to transform and adaptively repurpose those shopping centres into? So it's, for me, it's about choice of where you live and what you live in. It is now available, or will be certain, and that's when the sector will have really kind of established itself.
I think, John, also the stigma's just fallen away. So this Englishman's castle, it doesn't exist, because it used to be that, if you were renting, you were a second-class citizen, and that whole stigma has gone. People want lifestyle choice, and that's through whether they, we're not all buying DVDs anymore and storing hundreds of DVDs. We have Netflix. Renting is not seen as a kind of poor man's choice, and actually what it's now about is, where do you live? So there's a bit there around lifestyle. It's about being in the heart of it. It's about being where real communities are happening, where there's excitement, where there's culture, and it doesn't matter whether you own that apartment or you rent it. No one questions that. No one sees that as an oddity, and that's just changes in time and views on the world. And as we become much more open and flexible, hopefully post-COVID community generally, people want that ability to up sticks and move, because generally people are going to work 10 different careers in their time. They're going to be living in 10, 15 different cities. And that ability to just, as you say, up sticks and move and end up somewhere very comfortable, that's about choice. And that's what people are doing. It's been proven by people moving into these buildings and the occupancy levels being the level they've been. And the fact that, so many of these things are pre-let way before we're out of the ground. So, there's a real movement on this.
Is there anybody out there, Ed, who is looking at providing a form of rented accommodation for every life stage? So, for example, you might go from student accommodation into a city centre apartment, then somewhere suburban, then senior living. A family of brands. How far away are we from people living their entire lives in rented accommodation as the norm?
There's this really human thing, isn't there, that we all want to put everyone in boxes, and we all want to think that you live in a student apartment and then you move to a flat and then you move to a house. And I do think there's an element of that. And I'd sit there and say, I think there's a few people looking at, we're one of them, we're looking at suburban housing and multifamily apartments. But the reality is that the range of people that live in both of those things, it isn't that someone who's living in a multifamily apartment is 25 to 30. They're 25 to 80, and in a suburban house the range is exactly the same. And you might have slightly more younger people living in apartments and then moving into urban housing, but it's not as succinct as that. And it's one of the reasons why I've never been a massive fan of retirement later living, because I think actually if you provide good quality rental product, you don't necessarily need to then put people into an age bracket of what they're getting. Good quality services and good quality amenity fit all people because they're good quality. It's not about me being kind of 60 and deciding at that point I want something very different to what I had at 30. It's about having that flexibility, and that's why service provision is so much more important in many ways than amenity, because your services can be flexible. They can flex with what people want in your buildings, and they can flex for different age ranges. So it might be you're providing homework club at a certain time, you're then providing yoga, and there's different things for different kind of points in your life, and that can happen whether you're living in an apartment or a house. So I think there is that much broader aspect now of looking at creating brand and covering the whole range of what housing can look like. But I think it's dangerous when you start trying to segment people into age brackets as to where they should live and what they want to live in.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ed. Let's talk a bit about the physical product. John, what are the differences, if any, between a new build scheme for rental and one that a developer might put up and sell all the units to investors or owner occupiers?
So there's definitely a difference, and the difference is directly linked to the bottom line of that return on investment and yield that you've just been talking about. So you know, the for sale market is and you know, I've spent all my career working in the for sale market as well, right? It's not a bad thing. It's not either or. But the for sale market is you know, it's a get in, get out model. You know, it's buy land, get planning, build it, sell it. It's got a finite period that you're, as a developer, you're financially involved in it. The residents who are buying from it are then the owners of that asset, and they're anything to do with maintenance, management, upkeep, etc. is either your responsibility or is called service charge. Rental is a operating business, and it's get in and stay in. So you buy land, get planning, build it, and then operate it. And that operations might, you know, as a developer, might be you just designing for it for the 3-4 years before you jump out, and then it's put into a different fund. But the building itself has to sustain the long-term management and operation. So it's got to sustain people moving in and out of that building. It's got to sustain the apartments being re-rented and released every, I don't know, 18 months maybe on average, so maybe 2 years, maybe longer, I don't know. But you know, it needs, you know, that people will then go in and there'll be a, you know, redecorating it. That if your washing machine breaks, it's like, hi Richard, my washing machine is broken. Probably in 2 hours you've got a new washing machine. You're not sitting around waiting for a plumber who's gonna, so that washing machine has to easily come out and easily go back in again, and that washing machine then has to move somewhere to be fixed and then repurposed for something else. So how the building, the life cycle of the building works as a living, breathing, operating asset, much like your hospitality world, is the fundamentals in it. And from a design perspective, you know, the lines that we draw on the bits of paper at the start are really, really crucial to that, because if you don't get that operation part right and you end up with 2 extra members of staff, for example, moving bins around when you could have designed it in a slightly different way with how you're going to deal with the refuse strategy. It's not all glamorous, by the way. Then you know, then you're saving the 25-year investment for 2 extra members of staff moving bins around. You know, it translates itself right down to the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's the same with the technology in that respect as well.
Not just add amenities. Has it got a gym and a club room and a concierge desk, and therefore it's built to rent? It's a whole complex approach to how you design and implement those strategies. Sorry, Giles.
No stress. It's the same with the technology piece as well, because with operating, you bring in a whole world of service delivery and doing that on a very managed, carefully reducing your costs of operation, really, and also understanding if people are using the spaces on a sort of fair basis. Because if people are using a lot of energy up and you're charging one bill or one fee, then actually understanding that and being able to sort of report across the building so you can see what's working and what's not working will drive returns through to the bottom line as well. So I'm a big believer in design and sort of obviously the technology used to facilitate that smooth operation and good customer service.
Giles, that brings neatly onto a question here from Mark Owen. Obviously, if you're the owner and operator of a building, it's in your interest for it to be as efficient as possible in every way. But Mark is asking, are rental customers interested in the sustainability of the homes they're considering? And what are the associated costs of delivering sustainable homes? John, do you want to talk about the cost bit? And then maybe Richard, you can talk about the appetite for sustainability.
Sure.
Yeah, it might maybe slightly the other way around. I'll just say my little bit on it, but I strongly believe that the environmental and sustainable credentials of a building is going to be a reason of choice for a resident. So in the same way that people are choosing their clothes by, are they ethically sourced, etc., etc. You know, their food, they're choosing all the things that Richard touched on earlier that we are renting as being ethical, sustainable, etc. They will do the same with the bricks and mortar within which they're living. And when the market is at a level of maturity that you have a real choice, you know, you have LNG on one side of the road and Moda on the other side of the road, Lincoln next to Greystar, you know, you're going to make a choice. That is going to be one of your reasons to choose. And I think the costs of it, I think in the residential world, I'd say the building regulations are on a, you know, that they're changing every 3 years at the moment in our sector of what we have to contribute back in terms of Part L and the sustainability of them. They're pretty sustainable buildings as they are. We have to look more at the sustainability of not just the fabric of the building, but of how we're sourcing the materials and those sort of things, I think, as well. Sorry, Richard.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's one of the most critical elements of what we design, build, and deliver against. And the residents, absolutely, John, it's paramount in their minds. We've found, you know, through our surveys that the same, you know, the way we operate our CSR, ESG policy, from the design of their apartments to everything that we do once they're there, is absolutely critical. We've teamed up with a couple of key partners for the technology part, where we can manage our buildings far more effectively and give that information and feedback to the residents. So individual meters that are economical, that are explainable, ready from day one. Everything that we do is geared around that resident experience. So the CSR, ESG, the build, the resident total experience is all around that sustainability, and also the impact on the community. You know, we build big buildings and they have a massive impact. So we have to embrace those communities and bring them in and understand what they require and the impact of our building on those locally as well. So I think that the sustainability is critical to future developments. It will separate us out from the competition.
And the cost point is, if you're in it for the long term, it's probably negligible in order to provide it. If you're in it for the short term, it's much more difficult to provide it. Yeah,
we're not builders who are going to flip. I think if you're going to flip a development, then yeah, it's going to be pretty low on your ideas of what you need to invest in. But when you're a long-term investor, I think absolutely the cost is negligible.
I think on that as well, the other bit, you know, you're looking very much at the customer, the kind of, you know, the general public, Joe Public, building to building, that's right. But you know, take a step back from that and look at just the institutions themselves. Institutions will not buy buildings that they cannot see as sustainable. They will not invest in them. They will not take them forward. And that's partly to Richard's point about running costs, but it's also partly about doing the right thing. And ESG from a corporate perspective is now top of the agenda. It sits alongside price. And we've moved, you know, in the last 5 years so far on that if you are building a building that's not sustainable and someone else down the road is, and you know, you may be a cheaper building, but you will not get through that process of an institutional, you know, investment committee looking at that because you're not doing things ethically or sustainably.
We touched earlier on the repurposing of perhaps retail premises or office buildings, and I think, Ed, you're involved in one such project. So what other types of building do you see as suitable for conversion? I mean, it's my understanding that it's more expensive to convert a building than to, you know, to build one from the ground up. So what is the attraction of that, and how can you retrofit sustainability and so on into a project like that?
I think that's right. I think the key, and John and I both work on a number of projects together like this. We're doing a number of things with Hammerson together, and effectively, you know, that piece is around not necessarily, you know, kind of refitting, it is repurposing. So it is about, in most cases, knocking something down and building up, but building something in its place. I think there's a danger of kind of, you know, repurposing something which is retrofitting. That doesn't work. And I think BTR, that's a really difficult place to get to, because, you know, for all the reasons John's just kind of mentioned about creating the right design for longevity, if you've already got all the things in the wrong place and you're just trying to put a new facade on, that is going to be, it's going to be a secondary asset for a long time. And that's the beauty of kind of retail, because in a way, if you're starting to look at shopping centres, and, you know, we're working on a number of the Debenham sites, they do make sense because generally they're part of the building that's out of the main shopping centre. They can be, they've got their own kind of ground floor, they've got their own entrances. that building can be knocked down, it can be rebuilt into a build-to-rent, and then it can be linked back into the rest of the shopping centre and the rest of the community that goes on around it. That's a much more attractive play than trying to, build something that was an office and convert, because that is a much harder thing to get right.
And George, I'd say as well that there's what we're talking about here is large scale investment level build to rent, right? So, but there is other products which will come forward, which will the planning rules have changed in the last 6 months to allow adaptation of non-resi uses into residential and a bit more fluidity and change between uses. I think you'll expect to see some entrepreneurial uses of how our high streets change a little bit in that regard. I think they'll want to keep some management. I think also there's an inherent desire in the British society to live in things which have character and have a twist or a bit of heritage to them. It's often part of our initial research. It's what was the site originally, etc. So even if it is demolished and build something new. So I think the repurposing of some buildings which are of historic interest and have a certain character will definitely have probably an uplift on the rents, but they again need to be for the long term, and probably you don't get the scale that Ed's talking about when you're looking at transforming shopping centres or larger offices or those sort of things.
Yeah, thanks, John. One word which keeps popping up is community. So how do you engender a sense of community in a new development? Richard, is it through a combination of programming and amenities? I mean, people want to feel like they belong to where they live and also to be part of the wider neighbourhood. So how do you go about that process?
Well, I guess it goes back to what John was just saying, that sense of being localized, the local community, the actual fabric of the building matches the actual ambience of the city. So the McEwan in Edinburgh, which we're developing at the moment, is built on the old McEwan factory, where they deliver the beer. And then there's aspects of that within that building. So the sense of local community is brought in through design. And then, as important, is the engagement with the team on property. So we would always employ locally, try to bring that local twist. And then the program of experiences where we would reach out to the local communities and engage with them is part of our whole, our DNA, that we want to be wrapped into the neighborhood. We're building neighborhoods, we're building communities, and therefore we want to be a good neighbor and bring those neighbors into our property so they can experience what we can deliver, because those will be future tenants maybe. So the sense of community, yes, very, very important for us within our developments. And I think for the wider home to rent segment as well, I think it's critical to get that right. But that sense of being local, I think people want that. Even if I'm moving from London to Manchester for a job, I want to feel that I'm in Manchester with that local twist. So what we've done as an example is the team at Angel Gardens in Manchester, we've brought together a local companion guide. So these are 14 suggestions from the team in Manchester that we give to our residents, and these are local haunts that you wouldn't see normally. So the best coffee shop in Manchester as voted by one of our team members. And I'm bringing that little twist into our engagement with our residents has really gone down very well.
It's your hospitality background showing through there, isn't it? So what are the tricks of the trade have you bought from hotels to
I guess it's really knowing what the customer wants before they even know they want it. And I think that planning, that second guessing, that nurturing of the locality, we've always tried to do within Marriott and with other hotel groups I've worked for, and being ahead of the game. We don't want to be behind the curve. We want to be leading that curve. And we want the residents to know we've thought about things in advance. So an example would that be our mental health program. So we started the mental health program even before lockdown. What we've done, we've enhanced that through lockdown, even though we weren't asked to do that, to make it more acceptable, much more tangible for the residents. So I think second guessing in advance of what people want, then narrowing down what they want so it's bespoke, they feel it's for them, we've done it for them individually, is absolutely critical for the hospitality element to come into play. And having a very engaged team, motivated team to deliver, not just building management, that should just be a big tick in a box. It's how we make the building come alive in the local community, how it comes alive. And that is a resource of personalities, passion, determination that comes into play. So I think that there's a lot to be done with hospitality within this segment, and a lot more to come, I think, in the future with technology. There's a lot we can learn, but I think that being ahead and focusing on the residents is the #1 priority for us.
I would add to that just very briefly, because we're short of time. So in hotels, we've converted everything, car parks, whatever, prior to this. Even windowless rooms are being built in London, but good windowless rooms that look like outside space outside, but therefore very affordable. And the second thing is that what we found is that hotels are 24/7 for the community, so that they're not empty like offices at the weekend. There are people around. And in our hotel in Northampton, where there's some homeless issues, we can kind of take care of the homeless. So we bring security, we bring comfort, and if you're worried about walking home late at night, there's someone on reception always to look after you.
Thanks, Gerard. Thanks to everyone who has submitted questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get through all of them, but I think it's been a fantastic session. We could probably go on for another hour and still not get through our list of topics, but thanks for everybody's participation. I just want to show a few slides quickly before we go. The next in this series of urban living webinars is about the future of youth travel. That's 2 weeks today. That will also be at 2 p.m. Just a couple of other webinar streams that we're running here at IHM. My colleague Eloise is doing the Boutique Hotel Trailblazer series with some dates on there. All the info for these is in the chat if you'd like to register for any of these. And Paul Stevens, editor of Short-Term Rentals, has got his Rockstars series, which begins again this year on February the 2nd. And again, the link is in the chat.
Thank you, George.
So this session has been a precursor to the Urban Living Festival. We've got a fantastic range of speakers, sponsors, media partners for that event. We'd love to see loads of you there. We've got some strong media partnerships. If you'd like more information about that, then please do contact my colleague Katie, whose details are there and also in the chat, I believe. Please do give us a follow on our social channels to find out more about Urban Living Festival. Thank you to Res Harmonics for sponsoring this session, and thanks very much to John, Richard, to Ed, to Giles and to Gerard. Hopefully see a lot of you back here in 2 weeks' time for the youth travel. Thanks very much and goodbye. See you soon.